Hello builders! In today's video, we'll be diving into AWS Step Functions and we'll explore the features, use cases, and a practical example of how to leverage AWS Step Functions to build scalable and resilient workflows. Before we do that, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the upcoming videos. So let's get started. What are AWS Step Functions? So Step Functions is a fully managed service from AWS that allows you to coordinate and orchestrate your microservices and serverless applications. It allows you to build these state machines using either a declarative JSON-based language or a visual workflow editor. And this way you can build these workflows which allow you to have a robust, scalable, and resilient application. So let's see some of the features of step functions. So state machines, I told you about these step functions uses these state machines to define and manage the workflows. Each state in a state machine will represent a step in the workflow, and the transition between the states is triggered by events or conditions. You also have a visual workflow designer, which we're going to use later in the demo. So step functions will provide a visual interface for designing and visualizing the workflows, as I told you, and you are also able to get the output as JSON in the JSON states language. So you will be able to put it in your CI/CD pipelines and so on. It has built-in error handling and retries. You can do these retries and handle the errors. So you will have workflows that are resilient to failures and can recover from the errors. Also, you have multiple flow types, so you can execute multiple steps of your workflow, either sequentially, in parallel. You can have choice states, so you can decide on what to do next based on that choice. You can have map states which iterate through an array and do the same thing for each element of the array. Pass state and wait states. Wait state basically allow you to wait for a certain amount of time before continuing. And you can also have human approval steps. Basically, it will allow you to incorporate human approval steps in the workflow. This is particularly useful when you need human intervention for decision making or validation. So imagine you have a workflow where some worker needs to ship a package, and he can then just go and push the button, I have sent the package, and then the workflow execution resumes. So that's a very useful thing to have. Then Step Functions integrates with AWS services, with lots of them, so you can integrate with almost all of the AWS services, and you can call different API methods that the services have. For example, listing the contents of an S3 bucket and other things like this. This will enable you to leverage the power of other AWS services within your workflows. So let's see some use cases. Microservices orchestration. It will help you to coordinate and manage complex workflows across multiple microservices, ensuring that you have a reliable execution and fault tolerance. You can use it for ETL, extract, transform, load workflows. Order processing, this allows you to, for example, automate and streamline the order processing workflow. You can include steps like inventory management, payment processing, shipment tracking. And then you have one where you could build chatbots, because you are able to build these conversational workflows for the chatbots, enabling an interactive and dynamic conversation with the users. Also, data processing pipelines can be built with step functions. But let's see today's step functions example. This is something that we are going to build today in the hands-on part of this video. So this will be a state machine that will receive an input in form of a text. It will detect the sentiment of that text using AWS comprehend, and then it will have a choice state. And in this choice state here, it will decide to go to this way on this path, invoking the Lambda function if the sentiment is positive. If the sentiment is negative, it will start a parallel state in which it will invoke a Lambda function and send a notification that we have a negative comment or review or whatever what you want it to be. And the Lambda functions could do certain things like processing the comment or publishing it or things like that. So this is what we're going to build in the visual workflow editor. So let's get started. So here I am in the AWS console. I'm going to go, first of all, not to step functions, but to IAM, the IAM service, because I want to create an IAM role. In order for our step function state machine to work, we need an IAM role, which will define the permissions for our state machine. So let's go to roles and let's create a new role. And for the use case here, we have to select step functions like this and make sure it's checked here. Click on next, and then it already has this permission policy of Lambda invoke function, but we're going to need to add more. So I clicked next. I'm going to call this sentiment state machine role. Let's create the role, and after that I have to, let's find it, add some additional permissions. We have the Lambda role, which allows us to invoke Lambda functions, but I want to add SNS full access because I want to send SNS notifications with the state machine. Okay, and I also want to use comprehend, so I will need access to comprehend full access. Of course, you could scope these permissions to only allow the minimal necessary permissions, but for the sake of saving time, I'm just going to give it full access. So I have this role. I'm going to use it later. So let's go back and then go to step functions. You can find by searching on top here step functions, and then here I will expand this. I'm going to go to state machines, but I don't have any in this account. This is a demo account. So let's create one. First of all, I will have to choose between a standard or an express state machine. And here you have the differences between them. So standard can run up to a year. So the duration is 1 year. Express only 5 minutes, and then they have different supported execution rates, different transition rates. Pricing is a little bit different. Execution semantics differ, so you will need to look at all these things and decide which one is the better choice for you. For this demo, I'm going to use the standard one, and I'm going to click on next. And here is the visual editor. The visual editor is kind of a new thing. Before that, you had to write everything in this JSON states language, Amazon states language. But now you are able to use this visual editor, and it will generate that script for you. So What I want to do here, I can start right away. Here you see what kind of integration Step Functions has. It has integrations with almost all AWS services. You can just go search for an API operation. For example, if you would have wanted to list buckets from your AWS account, you would just drag this here. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to search for comprehend. So let's search here for comprehend. And why here it is, comprehend, and I want to use the detect sentiment, so maybe I should go here to detect sentiment. This is the one that I'm looking for. I'm going to drag it here, and here I will need to just modify this API parameters box a little bit. So this is used to get the data. So I'm going to use language code to send the data, excuse me. So language code should be English. So I'm doing this in English. And the text should come from the input to the state. I'm going to explain this in a bit, but I just let me write it down like this. So $.comment. So basically this will take this from the input to the state. Each state has an input and an output, and you're going to see this just in a minute. So let's click on next. Let's save this this state machine. Click on next. Here you see it generated the code for us automatically. You can put this in your CI/CD pipeline to automatically create the state machine, or you can use our infrastructure as code tools to do this as well. So click on next. Let's call this detect sentiment state machine. And then I'm going to choose from the roles, and I'm going to use this sentiment state machine role that I've created earlier. So this is the only one which is configured to be used with step functions. Let's click on create. And now I have my state machine. This is a very minimal state machine. It just has one step. Now let's start the execution and let's see what happens. So you see here, it waits for an input. And this is the input that will be passed down to my state machine. And I'm going to add here a comment. Let's say, I don't like spaghetti. Okay, so this is the comment I want to analyze with comprehend and detect the sentiment from this comment. Okay, and let's start execution, and my state machine will run. And you see it shows us with colors what was the result of the run. So when you see green, it means that it succeeded. If you would had an error, it would have been red, in progress is blue, and so on. If I click on this step, you see I have the input, which is comment I don't like spaghetti, and I have the output, which is the result from the comprehend API call. And comprehend detected that this comment is negative. So when you say I don't like, this is a negative thing, so it detected it's negative. Now we're going to go back and edit the state machine, and we're going to use this output. We're going to send this output down the line in our state machine and do things based on this. So let's go to edit state machine, use the workflow studio. I could write this as well, this Amazon States language, but I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the workflow studio. So here is the first state. This is our first state in the step function state machine. Now I want to add a choice flow. So you see here, I have the actions, but I also have the flows. And I'm going to drag here this choice. And here I can set up some things. So the first rule, I'm going to, but before I do that, yeah, I should have shown you. Let's cancel. Go back and let me show you in the executions. In the output I shown you, but you see here the sentiment is contained in this sentiment under the sentiment keyword, and I have to use this one. So let's go back, edit the state machine, drag the choice again here, and now in the rule for the choice state I'm going to edit it and add the condition. And here I'm going to use that sentiment key that was there in the output of the first state. And I want this, if this is equal to a string constant, so positive. So if the sentiment is positive, I want to execute this branch of the state machine. And I'm going to add new choice rule. This is rule number 2, and add a condition. This time I'm going to again use is equal to string constant negative. If it's negative, then it will go to the other branch. And I'm going to always have a default branch, and for the default one I can just drag a fail state here. So if it couldn't detect the sentiment, it's not positive or not negative, it will be a failed state. So it couldn't detect the sentiment of my text. But I now have to complete these 2 branches. So if my sentiment is positive, I want to execute a lambda function, so invoke a lambda function. I just drag it here. And after I've dragged it here, so this is telling step functions that this is a lambda invocation, but I also have to choose which lambda function. And I'm going to do this here on the configuration tab. So I'm going to use this echo function. The echo function will just echo back what was sent to it. So it doesn't do anything complicated. Of course, in a real world scenario, you would build here some business logic that would do something based on this positive sentiment. Maybe this is a review for a product, and if the reviews are positive, you can maybe increase the price of the product or things like that. Then for the negative branch, I'm going to add a flow. And here, to complicate things a bit, I'm going to add a parallel flow. So this again expects 2 different things that needs to be executed, and they will be executed in parallel. So if the sentiment is negative, I want to do the following. I want to invoke a lambda function, which will, let's say this will be the increase quality lambda function. This increases the quality of the product. Let's say we were just playing around. So it does that. And I also want to send an SNS notification. So I want to send myself an email. Okay, this is a negative comment. Maybe you have to check it or do something about it. Check the product, why it's getting negative reviews, things like that. So these will be executed in parallel. You see, now our step function state machine is pretty it's a little bit more complex. It's not that complex, but you see we have the choice state, which takes the sentiment. If it's positive, it will go down this way. If it's negative, it will go down this way, and it will execute the lambda invoke, the SNS publish, and that's about it. So let's apply this. But first, for the SNS, I have to specify a topic, so where the notifications will be sent. Here I have a topic which I created beforehand. It's just going to send me an email. This is pretty simple. I will maybe sometime do a video on SNS and I'll show you there, but it's pretty simple to set up an SNS topic for notifications. Okay, so that's about it. Let's apply and save. And you see it has generated for me all these states language thing, which I can put in my infrastructure as code tools. Okay, so now I will start an execution and I have to give it an input. So let's say um, I really like your book, and exclamation sign. Start execution, and you see it's in progress. Blue is in progress. It has went down in this path. So we can click on each of these steps. So I clicked on detect sentiment. The input was, I really like your book. Output is from the comprehend API call, is that the sentiment is positive on this one. And then the choice state is entered. The input and the output is the same, positive. And it will go to Lambda invoke. For Lambda invoke, we have the input positive. This is sent to the Lambda function as the event payload. And then I get back the response from the Lambda. And Lambda says, response back with the status code 200, hello, I am Lambda and I received the following event. And it basically echoes back the event to me, which it received. So, and then the execution ends. So this was our first run. Let's do a new execution, but this time I'm going to change I really hated your book. So this should be negative. The hate is a strong negative thing. And you see it immediate, this is in progress now, but it went to the negative branch of the state machine. So if I click on it, you see it invoked the Lambda, and it receives the input as the negative, and then it gets back again the event. And SNS publish was also executed. So here I have the response from SNS. It should be a status code 200, meaning that everything was fine. And if I check my email, just a moment, I should have an email. I'm just going to bring this in. So just a moment, here is my email that I received 0 minutes ago. Sentiment negative, I actually got this in my inbox. Of course, you would usually tailor this message to look a little bit different, but yeah, you can do this, so it's possible. Okay, so this was our state machine that we have built. We have run it a few times and it worked. We can look back. You see we have this execution log here, the executions. We can go back and look at each of the executions and see what happened in each execution. Each of the task states as they were entered. So what was the input, and then for each of these you have the complete details here. Here when we invoked comprehend, the SDK, the detect sentiment and what it was returned, and so on. Basically you have everything here, the full log for this execution. So let's go back a little bit. This is, it also builds this visual representation of our workflow, in which you can zoom in, zoom out. You can export it as a PNG image to put it in your documentation, export it as JSON, YAML. You could also import a definition if you already have one. And yeah, that's about it on it. Yeah, all the API methods that you can embed in step functions, you can just drag and drop them, and it will work. So in DynamoDB, for example, list tables, you could drag this in here and put it somewhere, and so on. I won't insist more on this. I think this is pretty obvious what it does and how you can use it. This was the video for today. Hopefully you like it. If you did like it, then please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, follow me on social media, and then hopefully I will see you with another video soon.